Have you ever wondered what it's like to be arrested by someone who's supposed to protect you? I'm FBI agent Mia Johnson, and that question has been echoing in my mind ever since that fateful day. The sun was shining brightly over New York City, but the light that illuminated the vibrant streets couldn't dispel the darkness that was building in my heart. I was a black woman in a world that often saw me only by the color of my skin, not my abilities. My dream had always been to make a difference, to fight crime, and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But that day, what I expected to be a routine mission turned into a nightmare. The landscape in which I lived and worked was a mix of hope and despair. New York, with its vibrant diversity and rich culture, was also a place where prejudice and discrimination lurked beneath the surface. I walked the streets, surrounded by skyscrapers that seemed to touch the sky, but I felt as if I were trapped in an invisible cage. Each day, I struggled with the expectations and stereotypes that surrounded my role as an FBI agent. The distrust that many felt toward my work was a constant weight on my shoulders. The central conflict in my story began when a racist police officer decided that I was the criminal in a situation that clearly required my protection. He arrested me on absurd charges, completely ignoring the truth I was trying to uncover. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. How could someone who was supposed to be on my side, who took an oath to protect and serve, treat me like a criminal? This experience not only shook my confidence, but it also jeopardized all the work I had done up to that point. The aftermath of this arrest was devastating. The humiliation and pain of being discredited by someone I was supposed to trust created deep fissures in my soul. My colleagues and co-workers looked at me with a mixture of compassion and disbelief. I felt alone, as if I were fighting a battle that no one else understood. The truth was on my side, but the system seemed to be against me. I was fighting not only to prove my innocence, but also to regain my dignity and self-confidence. The injustice I faced wasn't just about me. It was a reflection of a system that often fails to recognize the humanity of people like me. That situation forced me to question not only what I believed about justice, but also about the very society we live in. The struggle that unfolded from that event was not just a personal battle, but a larger fight against a system that perpetuates inequality and discrimination. Over time, I realized that this experience, while painful, could be the spark that lit a flame of change. The resilience I had developed throughout my life was now becoming a driving force to fight injustice. I knew I needed to transform my pain into power, not just for myself, but for all the voices that were being silenced. What started as a devastating setback could become a new beginning, not just for me, but for those who, like me, have faced the brunt of prejudice and mistrust. This story is a testament to the fight for justice and dignity in a world that too often fails to recognize the value of each individual. It is a call to action, not just for those who face injustice, but for all of us to come together and fight against what is wrong. The journey that unfolded from that day on was not just about me, but about the transformation and hope that can be found even in the darkest of circumstances. And so, the fight for truth and justice began, not just as a personal battle, but as a movement that would resonate far beyond me. Listening to the echoes of my own thoughts, I realized that the fight for the truth would not be an easy journey. In the days following my arrest, I faced small challenges that, while seemingly insignificant at first glance, began to test my resilience in ways I had never imagined. The first test came in the form of a report I had to write about the incident. The pressure of documenting something so unpleasant and humiliating was almost unbearable. I sat at my computer, the words refusing to flow. How could I report something that still caused me so much pain? Frustration began to turn into anger. I needed to find a way to turn this experience into something positive. Meanwhile, the reactions around me were mixed. Some colleagues expressed sympathy, while others looked at me skeptically. The gaze of one of my superiors weighed on me like an anchor. He was someone I had always trusted, but now he seemed distant and hesitant. This uncertainty fueled a sense of vulnerability I had never felt before. Every time I passed him in the hallway, my heart raced. Did he believe me? Or was he also swayed by the rumors and suspicions surrounding my arrest? These questions hurt more than any insult. Amidst this emotional turmoil, I found a small refuge in a colleague who became an unexpected friend. She approached me after a tense meeting and, with a gentle smile, told me that she had always admired my work and was willing to help me with whatever I needed. The sincerity in her words lit a small flame of hope within me. Dealing with the distrust of others became less of a burden when I had someone by my side. Our conversations became a safe space where I could express my frustrations without fear of judgment, and this began to help me process what had happened. She also introduced me to other colleagues who, although reluctant at first, gradually began to offer support. The formation of this group of allies gave me the strength and courage to face the challenges that lay ahead. However, these moments of solidarity could not erase the shadow of my recent past. With each step I took, the weight of my situation loomed over me, like a dark cloud that refused to lift. As I struggled to find my feet, small hints of a larger conflict began to emerge. A new case was being investigated in the division, and rumors of corruption within the police force were beginning to spread. The officer's name came up frequently in discussions, and it made me uneasy. He had become a symbol of what I was up against, not just personal injustice, but the struggle against a system that often fails to protect the innocent. The possibility that others were going through what I had been through lit a fire inside me. I couldn't just let my grief take over. I had to take action. With each new challenge, I found myself slowly reconnecting with my determination. Dealing with rejection and self-doubt became part of my new reality, but each small obstacle also taught me valuable lessons about myself. I learned to be stronger than I ever imagined. Despite the insecurity that still gripped me, the fight for justice began to transform into a purpose. It was a new beginning, not just for me, but for all those who, like me, felt invisible and powerless. The journey was far from over, and I knew that greater challenges lay ahead. But with each step, I felt that I was shaping not only my story, but that of all of us. The fight for truth and dignity became a collective mission, and I was determined not only to face my fears, but to transform this pain into a movement that would resonate far beyond me. Hope, which had once seemed distant, now became a beacon guiding my path. And so, even in the face of hardship, I began to find my place in this world, one struggle at a time. However, these moments of solidarity could not erase the shadow of my recent past. With each step I took, the weight of my situation loomed over me, like a dark cloud that refused to lift. As I struggled to find my feet, small hints of a larger conflict began to emerge. A new case was being investigated in the division, and rumors of corruption within the police force were beginning to spread. The possibility that others were going through what I had been through lit a fire inside me. I couldn't just let my grief take over. I had to take action. With each new challenge, I found myself slowly reconnecting with my determination. Dealing with rejection and self-doubt became part of my new reality, but each small obstacle also taught me valuable lessons about myself. I learned to be stronger than I ever imagined. Despite the insecurity that still gripped me, the fight for justice began to transform into a purpose. It was a new beginning, not just for me, but for all those who, like me, felt invisible and powerless. The journey was far from over, and I knew that greater challenges lay ahead. But with each step, I felt that I was shaping not only my story, but that of all of us. The fight for truth and dignity became a collective mission, and I was determined not only to face my fears, but to transform this pain into a movement that would resonate far beyond me. Hope, which had once seemed distant, now became a beacon guiding my path. And so, even in the face of hardship, I began to find my place in this world, one struggle at a time. The following days became a trial by fire. The pressure to get the job done built up, and the looks from colleagues, even those who had previously been supportive, began to turn into silent expectation. Every day, the weight of distrust grew, and anxiety became a constant companion. Every time the phone rang or a message arrived, my stomach turned, anticipating new news or, worse, new accusations. It was one of those mornings that a new character entered my life. Inspector Ferreira, a respected veteran known for his unwavering ethics. He had arrived at the division to investigate allegations of corruption, and quickly became a central figure in my concerns. His investigations were increasingly close to the corruption, and the possibility that I might be a pawn in this game made me anxious. Ferreira had a penetrating gaze that seemed to see right through my defenses. With every conversation we had, I felt like he was trying to gauge my sincerity, as if he were looking for weaknesses. Meanwhile, my friendship with Sarah was deepening, but it was also bringing new challenges. She had a more optimistic outlook on the situation, always encouraging me to stand firm and fight for what was right. But at times, her hopes seemed unrealistic, and I found myself struggling against the tide of pessimism that threatened to drown me. The contrast in our perspectives was starting to create small frictions. I wanted to believe in change, but the distrust that permeated my surroundings was a shadow that was hard to ignore. Tensions rose as rumors about corruption began to intensify. Not just the central figure, but other names began to emerge in the whispered conversations. I wondered who else might be involved and whether this web of lies extended to those I considered allies. The fear of being betrayed, of seeing friendship and loyalty crumble around me, fueled a restlessness that left me sleepless. Nights became a battlefield. I tossed and turned, reliving every interaction, every skeptical glance. The pressure to maintain my composure during the day was exhausting, but the real struggle came when loneliness set in. It was in this silence that my insecurities came to life, and I began to question my own motivations. Did I really have what it took to face what lay ahead? One afternoon, as I sat in a nearby cafe trying to gather my thoughts, I received a text from Sarah. There was something in her tone that put me on edge. "We need to talk. It's about Ferreira and what he's uncovering." My heart raced. What did she know? What could this mean for me? I braced myself for what could be a turning point in my struggle. What I didn't realize was that this encounter could lead me to a new understanding of friendship, loyalty, and the very truth I had been searching for. I was about to enter a new chapter in my life, one where limits would be tested and I would have to decide how far I was willing to go to defend not only myself, but all those who were fighting alongside me. My meeting with Sarah couldn't have come at a more crucial time. As I walked to the cafe, my heart was pounding. What did she have to tell me? When I arrived, I found her sitting at a table in the corner, her expression worried. She stood up as soon as she saw me and began to speak. "Ferreira is getting close to some very dangerous things, and he suspects there's more involved. There are others, and you could end up in the middle of it all." Those words hit me like a bombshell. What exactly did that mean? I was about to be drawn into a conflict far greater than I had ever imagined. Sarah went on to reveal that Ferreira was collecting statements and that there was a group within the corporation that was loyal to the corrupt figures. The idea that there could be betrayal within my own colleagues paralyzed me. How could I trust anyone? The vulnerability I already felt now intensified, turning into a blanket of distrust that threatened to suffocate me. The emotional impact of this revelation was devastating. My stomach dropped, and the anxiety I had been carrying around turned to panic. The weight of the situation was taking its toll on me physically. I had trouble breathing, and my hands began to shake. Sarah, sensing my reaction, took my hand. "You are not alone. We need to be strategic. If you really want to expose the truth, we need to proceed with caution." Those moments of connection reminded me of the strength that was beginning to blossom within me, but they also forced me to confront how fragile I still was. The fight for truth felt increasingly daunting, and with each new piece of information, the thought of retreat began to haunt me. Doubt and fear became constant shadows, whispering that perhaps it would be easier to remain silent. Over the next few days, my interactions with Ferreira intensified. He asked me direct, pointed questions, and I felt that with each answer, he was exposing not only my situation but also my vulnerability. He had an almost supernatural ability to make me feel as if I was being evaluated with every word he uttered. The memories of my imprisonment, humiliation, and betrayal were still fresh, and I struggled not to let them color my present perception. Meanwhile, my friendship with Sarah began to be tested. She was so focused on finding a solution that she seemed to disregard how much I was struggling internally. I wanted to walk the line between hope and reality, but her insistence on moving quickly began to make me feel uncomfortable. The difference in our approaches created a tension that I couldn't ignore. She wanted to rush things, while I felt paralyzed by fear. Conversations became more frequent, but also more difficult. I listened to her, but a part of me was shutting down. The pressure increased, and the looks of colleagues, who before were just skeptical, now became visibly hostile. The mood in the division was changing, and I felt that at any moment a storm could brew. What was once a workspace had become a psychological battlefield, and each day brought new challenges. The tensions culminated in an unexpected event. During a staff meeting, Ferreira revealed that he was about to give a major presentation on the corruption investigations and mentioned a few names. When he mentioned a central figure, my heart stopped. I knew this was the opportunity one had been looking for, but the fear of being seen as a traitor paralyzed me. The pressure was unbearable. That night I couldn't sleep. Doubts and insecurities danced in my mind, like ghosts that wouldn't leave me alone. What should I do? It would be easier to stay silent, to avoid confrontation. But at the same time, the idea of not fighting for the truth made me anxious. I couldn't be another victim of circumstances. The fight for justice wasn't just personal. It was a matter of dignity, not just mine, but of all those who were being oppressed. The next morning, I decided I needed to take action. I could no longer let myself be carried away by fear. With a new sense of determination, I reached out to Sarah and invited her for a chat. We needed to align our visions, find a middle ground. It was time to turn our friendship into a strategic partnership. What was at stake was much bigger than our differences. It was the truth we needed to expose. As we talked, I realized that the friendship that had become a source of tension could now be the fuel for change. Together, we could face not only corruption, but also our own fears. The journey was far from easy, but now I had someone by my side who believed in me, just as I was beginning to believe in myself. The fight for the truth was about to intensify, and I was ready to face whatever came. With each step, I felt stronger, more ready to challenge the system and the injustices that permeated it. Change was coming, and I wasn't going to back down. The journey for truth and dignity continued, and I was determined to be a part of it, not just for myself, but for all those who felt powerless and invisible. The turning point came unexpectedly, and the tension that had been hanging in the air turned into a defining moment. During an emergency meeting, Ferreira revealed that he had received new information about corruption within the corporation. He looked directly at me as he spoke, as if trying to read my soul. The room was filled with an oppressive silence, and the feeling that all eyes were on me made me feel like a cornered animal. Then Ferreira played an anonymous recording. The screen lit up, and the words of a former employee, desperate and anguished, echoed through the room. He spoke of bribes, data manipulation, and a scheme that involved not only Thompson but also people in positions of power I could never have imagined. My heart sank as I realized that this was a cry for help, a wake-up call for those like me who were caught up in this turmoil. The recording contained details I knew well but had never been able to prove. The former employee mentioned a meeting that would take place that very week, and the urgency in his voice was palpable. The emotional impact of this revelation was overwhelming. A wave of relief mixed with fear. Relief that now there was confirmation of what I suspected, but fear that this meant the situation was about to escalate. The former employee could be the key to the truth, but he could also be a target. I knew that from that moment on, I could no longer hide. The idea of becoming actively involved in the fight for truth had become an undeniable reality. What made me hesitate, however, was the idea that the consequences could be devastating. The recording hit like a bomb, and the room exploded in murmurs. Ferreira was determined to investigate further, but the people around me seemed increasingly apprehensive. The climate of distrust grew, and I knew I was being observed differently. Alliances that were once simple began to crumble, and the feeling of loneliness intensified. How could I trust anyone now? After the meeting, I reached out to Sarah. I needed to share my concerns while also seeking support. She was excited about the possibility of the truth coming out, but I couldn't shake the crushing weight. What if the recording was just the beginning? What if Ferreira realized I had information he could use against me? The conversation we had was intense. I exposed my fears, and for the first time, I saw tears in Sarah's eyes. She was scared too, but at the same time, there was a glint of determination. We need to do something with this information. We can't let it be forgotten. This is our chance, she said, her voice firm. That made me think. The urgency of the situation was becoming clear. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. The former employee who had spoken on the recording was a person like me, someone who had the courage to speak the truth. If he could do it, why couldn't I? As we discussed our next steps, a new wave of courage began to well up within me. I decided I couldn't be a spectator anymore. What was at stake was not just my safety, but that of everyone who was being oppressed. Sarah's determination inspired me to embrace the idea that the fight for the truth was more important than any personal fear. From that moment on, the strategy we developed included a plan to find the former employee. We needed to convince him to talk, to join us. The adrenaline started to flow, and I realized that instead of feeling the weight of fear, I could use that energy to take action. Every step I took toward the truth made me stronger. The life-changing event not only altered the course of my story, but also the way I viewed myself. I was no longer a victim at the mercy of circumstances. I was becoming a champion of truth. The new circumstances created by the recording gave me a new purpose, and with it, anticipation. The battle was far from over, but I now had a direction. The climax was building, and I knew that soon I would have to face not only Ferreira but also the corruption that permeated the corporation. What had previously seemed impossible was now within our reach, and the fight for justice became more than a necessity. It was a matter of honor. The journey I was about to embark on would not be easy, but I was willing to face the challenges. Not only did the truth need to be exposed, but I also needed to reaffirm my strength and determination. The upcoming fight was not just for me, but for all those who felt powerless, and I was ready to lead that battle. The immediate consequences of our turning point began to manifest themselves in a powerful way. The recording that Ferreira presented not only exposed a system of corruption but also cast a shadow over all of us. The atmosphere in the company changed radically. The whispered conversations in the hallways became more frequent, and fear was palpable. I felt this tension in my stomach, like a stone that wouldn't leave me alone. The pressure of having to act, of not letting the truth get lost again, now became a responsibility that weighed heavily on my shoulders. Sarah and I began meeting at a nearby cafe after work, discussing strategy and planning how to reach the former employee. The urgency of the situation became increasingly clear, and the idea that we might be watched made me uneasy. Every message we exchanged seemed loaded with meaning, and I couldn't help but think that something bigger was at play. This paranoia was spreading among our colleagues, and the feeling of discomfort was becoming a new normal. Every day, the pressure increased, and the fear of reprisals became a constant shadow. In addition, new threats began to emerge. Ferreira, determined to investigate corruption, became a target. He received anonymous warnings, and his safety seemed at risk. This situation made me anxious because I knew I had information that could help him, but at the same time, the fear of exposing myself was paralyzing. How could I help him without putting my own life at risk? The fight for the truth was intensifying, and I saw people around me torn between supporting Ferreira or distancing themselves, fearful of the possible consequences. In this chaotic scenario, I began to notice changes within myself. The hesitation that had previously consumed me began to dissipate, giving way to a growing determination. I was beginning to see myself as more than just a pawn in this game. The idea that I could be a defender of the truth gave me strength, and I wanted to use this new perspective to my advantage. However, this transition was not easy. Doubts still lingered. What if I failed? What if, in the pursuit of the truth, I ended up jeopardizing everything I had built? Meanwhile, my friendship with Sarah became a safe haven in the midst of the storm. Our conversations deepened, and our mutual support proved essential. Being together in this fight not only solidified our friendship, but also gave us the courage to face the challenges that lay ahead. Our connection grew stronger, and at the same time, External pressure seemed to bring us even closer together. The fight for justice became a bond that kept us strong, even when uncertainty surrounded us. The expectation regarding the climax of our story grew every moment. The former employee who spoke on the recording was the key to everything, and I knew that by finding him we would be one step closer to exposing the truth. There was adrenaline pumping through my veins, a feeling that we were about to enter dangerous but necessary territory. What once seemed like a distant dream now became a tangible possibility. As I mentally prepared myself for the next steps, I realized that the fight for truth was more than just exposing corruption. It was an opportunity to reinvent myself. I was moving away from the image of a helpless victim and becoming a determined woman. This transformation would not be easy, but the vision of a future where justice prevailed motivated me to move forward, despite the fears that still haunted me. I knew the path ahead would not be linear. There would be ups and downs, moments of triumph and moments of despair. But as I looked back on my journey thus far, I realized that each step I took toward the truth made me stronger. The courage that was beginning to blossom within me was a flame that could not be extinguished. And so, with renewed determination, I prepared to face the unknown, knowing that the climax of this struggle was about to unfold and that I was ready to lead this battle for truth and justice. The day we decided to find the former employee arrived, and I was overcome by a mixture of adrenaline and fear. The cafe was emptier than usual, and this only intensified the feeling that we were being watched. Sarah and I exchanged meaningful glances, knowing we were about to cross a line that couldn't be undone. The former employee, Carlos, had agreed to meet us but wasn't sure it was safe. He had crucial information about the corruption scheme that could dismantle the entire operation, but he also knew that his life was at stake. When we arrived at the agreed-upon meeting place, a small, secluded park, the tension was palpable. The cold wind blew, and the sound of dry leaves under our feet seemed like an omen. When I spotted Carlos, sitting on a bench, his expression was nervous. He looked around, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. I approached, trying to calm him with a smile, but my mind was full of questions. What did he know? Was he willing to share? The urgency of the situation pressed me to act. Carlos began to speak, his voice shaking as he revealed details about those involved in the scheme. I could feel my heart racing with each word. But suddenly, a sense of danger coursed through me. A car stopped a few feet away from us, and I recognized the company logo. Fear set in, and I knew we couldn't be discovered. "Carlos, we need to get out of here," I said, pulling Sarah away quickly. But he hesitated, his expression reflecting the internal conflict between fear and the need to expose the truth. It was then that I realized that this fight wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about having the courage to face our own fears. I took a deep breath and decided that I couldn't leave Carlos alone right now. "Carlos, listen. You have to tell us everything you know, now," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. He looked at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if they catch us?" he asked, his anxiety almost palpable. "If we don't talk now, everything you know will be buried," I replied, feeling the urgency building. The car was still there, and the possibility of being caught was real. But I couldn't let fear control the situation. The truth needs to be told. "Let's do this together." Sarah stepped closer, placing her hand on Carlos' shoulder, showing him that he wasn't alone. The bond we shared became a light in the darkness. Carlos finally relented, and his words began to flow. He told us about the bribes, the illicit payments, and how corruption had infiltrated every level of the company. Adrenaline coursed through my body as I frantically took notes, knowing that I was capturing information that could change everything. Yet the feeling that time was running out grew stronger. Then what I feared happened. The car began to move toward us, and I knew there was no more time. "Carlos, we have to go now. You have to hide," I screamed, pulling Sarah away. Panic took hold of me, but the determination to protect Carlos drove me on. Deep down, I knew this was my chance to prove to myself that I was more than just an observer. I was part of this fight. As we ran, we heard the sound of screeching tires and shouting voices. The company was behind us, and the adrenaline made me feel alive. With each step, I pushed past the fear that had previously paralyzed me. I was fighting not only for the truth but for myself. When we reached a busy street, we melted into the crowd, breathless and scared, but the feeling of freedom was intoxicating. Once we were out of immediate danger, we found a safe place to hide. The emotional toll of the situation began to hit me, and I realized that I had faced my greatest fear, the uncertainty of what would happen next. The fight for truth was not just an external battle, but an internal journey of self-discovery. Sarah and I took a deep breath, and the connection between us grew even stronger. We were in this fight together, and it made us stronger. Carlos, now safe and in hiding, agreed to meet with us again to formalize his statements. The climax I had experienced had not only shaped me, but also solidified who we were. A group of women determined to fight for justice. That moment of tension and fear had become a flame that would light our path forward. I knew the journey was far from over, but I was ready to face whatever came, knowing that truth and justice were powerful forces that could change the world. After the tense encounter in the park, life took an unexpected turn. The information Carlos shared was crucial. With his help, we were able to gather evidence that exposed the corruption scheme in which the company was involved. The operation, which seemed impossible, began to gain momentum and, within a few weeks, the story was all over the newspapers. It was a victory, but the price to pay was high. Carlos became a key informant, but his fear never completely disappeared. He became estranged from his old life, and we, in turn, became targets. The adrenaline that had once driven me was now transformed into constant anxiety. The weight of responsibility we carried was immense. Not only were our lives at stake, but also the safety of everyone who supported our cause. Sarah and I became closer than ever before. The experience brought us together in ways I never could have imagined. Together, we analyzed information, strategized, and planned our next steps. Each day, our confidence in ourselves grew. I realized that I had achieved something far more valuable than just a desire for justice. I had found courage within myself that I had never known existed. However, the pressure wasn't limited to us. People around us were feeling the impact too. Friends who had previously been distant began to mobilize. The office where we worked became a hub for discussions about ethics and integrity. Several colleagues reached out, offering support and joining our cause. Many of them, inspired by our struggle, began to question their own situations and speak out against unfair practices that they had previously silently accepted. I realized that we were building a movement, and that filled me with hope. Reflecting on all this, I realized that the journey was not just about exposing corruption. It was a process of self-discovery. I learned how to deal with fear, uncertainty, and most of all, the importance of friendship and mutual support. The nights we discussed our fears and achievements became sacred moments, where vulnerability mixed with strength. What once seemed like a burden now became a symbol of resilience. As I thought about what had happened, I began to understand that the fight for justice was not a solitary battle. It was spreading outward, touching the lives of many others. The environment around us was beginning to change. Conversations about ethics and social responsibility became commonplace. Employees began to organize, forming support groups and discussing ways to foster a culture of transparency within the company. Carlos's courage in speaking out and ours in supporting him ignited a flame that quickly spread. As time went on, the pressure grew. The threats we received became more direct, but I was not about to back down. The fight for truth had become part of who I was. The need to expose corruption became a greater mission, a quest that transcended fear. I wanted other women to feel the same strength I had found. The fight for justice was not just a question of ethics. It was a question of empowerment. We decided it was time to organize a big event, a gathering that would bring together people willing to fight for change, so they could share their stories and experiences. The event became a turning point. With the support of several colleagues and the community, we managed to gather a surprising number of participants. The atmosphere was full of hope and determination. That night, as I looked into each participant's face, I realized that my actions had a real impact. Every story shared, every tear, and every smile reminded me that we were all in this together. What began as an act of desperation turned into a movement of solidarity and empowerment. The connection between us was palpable, and I knew I was no longer alone. The echo of our voices spread, and what had seemed like a dark path now lit up with possibilities. The fight for justice would not end here. I had found not only a purpose but a support network that would become the foundation of our resistance. We were ready to face whatever came next, armed with truth and the strength of unity. And so, with a heart full of hope and renewed determination, I realized that the journey was far from over. What we experienced shaped not only our lives but also the futures of many other people. Together, we were more than just a group. We were a force to be reckoned with, and I was ready to continue the fight, knowing that truth and justice would always prevail. The weeks that followed the event were intense. Our actions began to generate concrete changes. The company, pressured by the negative repercussions, announced an internal audit. Employees who previously felt powerless began speaking out, telling their own stories of abuse and wrongdoing. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and the courage that had previously seemed scarce now spread like wildfire on a dry field. Carlos, who had previously lived in constant fear, began to feel more confident. The testimonies we collected, along with the evidence we gathered, were more than just information. They were a testament to his bravery. He became a symbol of resilience for many, and it helped him find a new perspective on his life. We spoke often, and he shared how the struggle had transformed his worldview. It was gratifying to see how he was getting back on his feet, and it made me believe that we could really change things. Sarah and I, on the other hand, became more than just friends. We were partners in a mission. Our nightly conversations evolved from discussions of fear and insecurity to concrete plans for how to continue the fight. With each step, we felt each other's strength. I realized that what began as a solitary journey had turned into a support network, where each of us played a vital role. Additionally, the community around us began to mobilize in ways I could never have imagined. Through workshops and lectures, other women began to share their experiences, and women's empowerment became a banner that we all held together. We saw colleagues coming together to create an awareness campaign about ethics in the workplace, and it made me realize that we were creating not just a movement, but a new culture of accountability. Reflecting on all of this, I realized how the choices we made shaped our lives and the lives of so many others. The fear that once paralyzed me was now fuel that drove me forward. The fight for justice became part of my identity, and I was no longer willing to ignore the injustices around me. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. The arcs of the supporting characters also began to come full circle. Several of the colleagues I had spoken to about the importance of speaking out were now active voices in the fight for change. One of them became a passionate advocate for transparency. He even organized an ethics discussion group where he encouraged employees to speak openly about their experiences. It made me realize that each of us, by making small choices, can have a significant impact on the environment around us. Meanwhile, the company was facing increasing pressure. The audit had revealed irregularities that led to the dismissal of senior executives. The sense that we were making a difference was palpable. However, I knew the fight was far from over. Corruption would not disappear overnight, and there was a long road ahead. But the transformation we were already witnessing gave us faith that change was possible. As I looked back at the journey we had been on, I felt a mix of gratitude and sadness. Gratitude for having found a purpose and for having people by my side who shared this struggle. Sadness because the challenges we still faced seemed enormous. However, this sadness did not paralyze me. On the contrary, it motivated me to move forward. I knew that change would require sacrifices and that the path would be full of obstacles, but I was willing to face them. Confident that we were creating a meaningful movement, I prepared myself for what was to come. The fight for truth and justice was not just a moment in time. It was an ongoing journey. There was no turning back. The courage I found within myself was not just for me, but for all women who have felt oppressed and silenced. The future still seemed murky, but I was determined to keep going. The fight for justice had become part of my very essence, and I was ready to face any challenge that came my way. I knew there was still much to be done, that the forces of corruption would not give up easily, but now I had a support network, a close-knit community, and a renewed determination. And so, with my heart beating with hope and my mind focused on what was yet to come, I prepared myself for the next chapter of this journey. The path would not be easy, but truth and justice would always prevail. I was ready, not just to fight, but to lead, knowing that change was within our reach and that together, we were unstoppable. When I look back at the journey I've been on, I realize how each choice I made shaped me, transformed me, and in some ways, saved me. The path was not easy. I faced challenges that seemed insurmountable and moments when doubt enveloped me like a shadow. But every obstacle had its value, and every mistake I made became a precious lesson. What once seemed like a maze with no way out now reveals itself as a tapestry of experiences that, together, have led me to a place of understanding and acceptance. On that fateful day, when I finally confronted my insecurities and fears, I realized that the time had come to face the truth. The weight of guilt I was carrying was becoming unbearable, and I knew I needed to free not only myself but also those who had in some way been affected by my actions. The decision to open up and share my story with those I loved was a turning point. The conversation was not easy. Tears were shed and harsh words were said. But in the end, what I feared turned into an act of courage. In doing so, I not only freed others but also myself. The forgiveness I sought and was finally able to offer myself felt like a weight lifted from my shoulders. I learned that vulnerability is not a weakness but rather a powerful force that connects us to others. This connection is, without a doubt, what makes us human. I found support in places I didn't expect, and it taught me that we are never truly alone in our struggles. As the days turned into weeks, I realized that my journey was not over. In fact, it was just beginning. Joy that had once seemed like a distant concept began to seep into my life, and I was able to rediscover passions that I had forgotten. Music, which had always been a part of me, began to resonate in my heart. I began to play again, not just as a way to escape, but as a means to express my truth. Every chord became a celebration of life and a tribute to my new perspective. However, the unexpected twist was about to happen. One sunny day, while I was playing in a small cafe in the city, a woman approached me. Her eyes shone with an intensity that made me stop. She introduced herself as a music producer, and after listening to some of my songs, she expressed her desire to work with me. At that moment, I realized that the universe was offering me a second chance, a path I would never have imagined. What initially seemed like a hobby turned into a career opportunity. This unexpected event not only changed the trajectory of my life, but it also solidified the confidence I had cultivated throughout my journey. With each new song I wrote, I felt like I was not only telling my story but also touching the lives of others. And that connection, more than any professional success, has become my greatest legacy. What was once an internal struggle has now become a source of inspiration for many. I have learned that life's twists and turns often come when we least expect them. The hardships I have faced have prepared me to embrace this new opportunity with gratitude and humility. I am no longer the same person who began this journey. The growth I have experienced has been fundamental. I have learned that love and forgiveness are transformative forces that can heal deep wounds, and that even in the midst of pain, there is always a light that can guide us. Today, as I look to the future, I feel a mix of hope and determination. The challenges that still exist are no longer sources of fear, but rather invitations to grow even more. As I continue to play and compose, my hope is that my music will resonate in other souls, as a reminder that we are all capable of facing our battles and coming out stronger. The message that I take with me, and that I want to share with everyone who crosses my path, is that we are never alone. Pain and joy are part of the human journey, and each experience teaches us something valuable. If there's anything I've learned, it's that true strength comes from within, and that when we embrace our vulnerability, we find the connection we've been searching for. Life is a series of twists and turns, and even when everything seems lost, there is always a new chance to start over. So I end my story not as a full stop, but as a comma, a pause before a new chapter. I'm excited to see where this journey takes me, and I hope that in some small way, my experience can inspire others to seek what truly matters: authenticity, connection, and the ability to love and forgive. After all, life is a symphony, and each of us is an essential note in that melody.